All right, this is a screencast of complex sentences that you can use to take notes over the complex sentence. So, as a quick review, a clause is a verb and a subject. We know what a clause is. And a clause has, a simple sentence has one independent clause, such as, for example, the dog and the cat ran across the road. Ran is your verb, and the subject is dog and cat, one independent clause. A compound sentence has two or more independent clauses that are connected correctly, fanboys, or and a comma, or a semicolon. The dog chased, subject verb, the cat, comma, and the cat ran, subject verb, across the road. So that would be a compound sentence. Now, a complex sentence is a little bit more complex. I always talk about it in terms of it having one independent clause. So the man sat on the bench. Sat is your verb. Man is your subject. And it has one or more dependent clauses, such as because he had nowhere to go. Had is your verb. Who had? He had. But you notice right before the verb and the subject is a baby clause making word, because. And so it makes it a dependent clause, because all of a sudden you have what I call a baby clause. You have a baby clause making word right in front of it. And what's more complex in life than having a parent and then a baby? Two parents, not so complex. But when you actually add a baby into it, then life becomes complex. That's the analogy I like to use. So you'll always have one of these in a complex sentence. So what makes a dependent clause? Well, you have relative pronouns. I call those baby making or baby clause making words. These are one way to connect a dependent clause to an independent clause. And you'll need to write these down and know these. That, who, whom, whose, which, where, when, and why. They're relative pronouns. And just like a pronoun can be the subject, like he is running, he is the subject of the verb. Just like a regular pronoun, he, she, it, can be the subject of a verb, so can the relative pronouns. This is the house, complete idea. That stands here. What stands? That stands. I don't know the day, complete idea. When Jane marries him, not a complete thought. When Jane marries him, I don't know the day. The professor, whom I respect, is a hard worker. I respect whom could be a good question, but when it's at the beginning of the clause, it's dependent. Where it goes, nobody truly knows. Again, you listen to these and you hear that these four ideas are not complete, but they do have a subject and a verb. They do have a verb, and the verb has a subject, and the subject might be Jane, or the subject might actually be the relative pronoun. Now, going along with that, there are also things that we call subordinating conjunctions, and it's cut off here a little bit, sorry about that. But there are more baby clause making words. Subordinating conjunction, just like the coordinating conjunction, are fanboys. Our fanboys connect like things, this and that. Subordinating conjunctions connect things that are not equals, such as independent clauses and dependent clauses, and these are the most common. These are the ones that I'm going to expect you to know, so you should have them in your notes. After, although, as, because, before, though, even though, if, since, that, than, until, when, whenever, where, wherever, and while. And they will come at the beginning of the clause. If you see it at the beginning of the clause is going to be dependent, and you will automatically have a complex sentence. Before you go, sign the logbook. He asked if he could go early. You go is a complete thought. He could is a complete thought. He was is a complete thought. But notice right before it we have a baby clause making word, making it a dependent clause. So here are some examples. Though I love dogs, I cannot have one. I love dogs is a complete thought. You put though in front of it, it's not so complete. It's a baby. I hear it crying. Though I love dogs, I cannot have one because we do not have a fence. And notice this has two dependent clauses. one independent. It's still simply complex because it only has one independent clause, but it has two. We do have with because at the beginning. I love with though at the beginning. The young man, now this is the cool one right here. I like these because you can see that the dependent clause is sitting right in the middle of the independent clause. Is waiting for the girl. Who is waiting? The young man. So dependent clauses can actually just, it's like sitting like in the middle of your couch and your little kid gets up there and just like sits right in between mom and dad. And that's kind of what's happening here, is it just kind of sits where it wants to. And in fact, it's sitting right in between the subject and its verb. My favorite band, which broke up in 1984, reunited this summer. Broke up. What's the subject? Which. Relative pronoun can be the subject of a verb. And notice where the comma goes. There's a comma here. There's not a comma here. There's not a comma here. So here's the rule, and this is a punctuation rule. You do not need a comma if the independent clause comes first. If the dependent clause comes first, you follow it with a comma. And notice my example does the exact same thing. Dependent clause, comma, independent clause. Independent clause, no comma, dependent clause. So remember that, because that's going to be something that is going to be very important when you write anything in this class. When you have a complex sentence, independent clause comes first, no comma needed. If the dependent comes first, you need a comma before you go into the independent. And that, young men and ladies, is a complex sentence.